Hints on interpretation from two American teachers. William H. Sherwood and Dr. William Mason. William H. Sherwood. While a young student, the opportunity came to attend a summer music school founded by this eminent pianist and teacher. He had surrounded himself with others well known for their specialties in voice, violin, and diction, but the director himself was the magnet who attracted pianists and teachers from the four corners of the land. Perhaps the most intimate way to come in touch with a famous teacher is to study with him during the summer months in some quiet, retired spot. Here the stress of the metropolis, with its rush and drive, its exacting hours, its remorseless round of lesson-giving, is exchanged for the freedom of rural life. Hours may still be exact, but a part of each day or of each week is given over to relaxation, to be spent in the open, with friends and pupils. It was under such conditions that I first met Mr. Sherwood. I had never even heard him play, and was glad the session opened with a piano recital. His playing delighted me. He had both power and delicacy, and his tone impressed me as being especially mellow and fine. There was deep feeling as well as poetry in his reading of both the Chromatic Fantasy of Bach and the Chopin Fantasy in F minor, which were on the program. This opinion was strengthened at each subsequent hearing, for he gave frequent recitals and concerts during the season. My summer study with Mr. Sherwood consisted mainly in gaining ideas on the interpretation of various pieces. Many of these ideas seem to me beautiful and inspiring, and I will set them down as fully as I can from the brief notes jotted down at the time. I trust one may be pardoned a few personal references, which are sometimes necessary to explain the situation. With advanced students, Mr. Sherwood gave great attention to tone study and interpretation, even from the first lesson. He laid much stress on the use of slow, gentle motions in practice and in playing, on the spiritualization of the tones, of getting behind the notes to find the composer's meaning. He had, perhaps, a more poetic conception of piano playing than any master I have known, and was able to impart these ideas in clear and simple language. The first composition considered was Schumann's Nachtstück, the fourth of the set. He had a peculiar way of turning the hand on the middle finger, as on a pivot, for the extended chords, at the same time raising the whole outer side of the hand, so that the fifth finger should be able to play the upper melody notes round and full. In the middle section he desired great tenderness and sweetness of tone. There are several dissonances in this part, he said, and they ought to be somewhat accented, suspensions I might call them. In Bach and Handel's time, the rules of composition were very strict, no suspensions were allowed, so they were indicated where it was not permitted to write them. Chopin's Étude in sixths came up for analysis. This study needs a very easy, quiet, limpid touch, the motions all gliding and sliding rather than pushing and forceful. I would advise playing it at first pianissimo, the wrist held rather low, the knuckles somewhat high, and the fingers straightened. In preparation for each pair of notes, raise the fingers and let them down, not with a hard, brittle touch, if I may use the word, but with a soft, velvety one. A composition like this needs to be idealized, spiritualized, taken out of everyday life. Take, for instance, the Impromptu Op. 36, Chopin. The first part of it is something like this étude, soft, undulating, smooth as oil. There is something very uncommon, spiritual, heavenly, about the first page of that impromptu, very little of the earthy. The second page is in sharp contrast to the first. It comes right down to the hard, everyday business of life. It is full of harsh, sharp tones. Well, the idea of that first page we get in the study in sixths. I don't want the bare tones that stand there on the printed page. I want them spiritualized. That is what reveals the artist. In the left hand, the first note should have a clear, brittle accent, with firm fifth finger, and the double sixths played with the creeping, clinging movement I have indicated. If I should practice this étude for half an hour, you might be surprised at the effects I could produce. Perhaps it might take 10 hours, but in the end I am confident I could produce this floating, undulating effect. I heard Liszt play nearly all these études at one time. I stood by and turned the pages. In this étude he doubled the number of sixths in each measure. The effect was wonderful and beautiful. The Chopin Octave Study, number 22, needs firm, quiet touch, elevating the wrist for black keys, as Kullak explains, and depressing it for white keys. The hand must be well arched, the end fingers firm and strong, and the touch very pressing, clinging, and grasping. You always want to cling whenever there is any chance for clinging in piano playing. The second part of this etude should have a soft, flowing, poetic touch in the right hand, while the left hand part is well brought out. The thumb needs a special training to enable it to creep and slide from one key to another with snake-like movements. Rubinstein's Barcarolle in G major. The thirds on the first page are very soft and gentle. I make a good deal of extra motion with these thirds, raising the fingers quite high and letting them fall gently on the keys. The idea of the first page of this barcarolle is one of utter quietness, colorlessness. One is alone on the water. The evening is quiet and still, not a sound breaks the hushed silence. The delicate tracery of thirds should be very soft, thin, like an airy cloud. The left hand is soft too, but the first beat should be slightly accented, the second not. The first is positive, the second negative. Herein lies the idea of the barcarolle, the ebb and flow, the undulation of each measure. Begin the first measure very softly, the second measure a trifle louder, the third louder still, the fourth falling off again. As you stand on the shore and watch the great waves coming in, you see some that are higher and larger than others, so it is here. The concluding passage in sixths should diminish, like a little puff of vapor that ends in nothing. On the second page we come upon something more positive. Here is a tangible voice speaking to us. The melody should stand out clear, broad, beautiful. The accompanying chords should preserve the same ebb and flow, the advancing and receding wave-like movement. The exaggerated movement I spoke of a moment ago, I use in many ways. Anyone can hit the piano with a sharp, incisive touch, but what I refer to is the reaching out of the fingers for the notes, the passing of the hand in the air, and the final gentle fall on the key, not in haste to get there, but with confidence of reaching the key in time. If you throw a stone up in the air, it will presently fall back again with a sharp thud. A bird rising, hovers a moment and descends gently. This barcarolle is not at all easy. There is plenty of work in it for flexible hands. It is a study in pianissimo, in power controlled, held back, restrained. Taking up the Toccatina of Rainberger, Mr. Sherwood said, "I like this piece. There is good honest work in it. It is very effective and most excellent practice. You ought to play this every day of the year." It is written in 12/8, which give 4 beats to the measure, but I think that gives it too hard and square a character. I would divide each measure into 2 parts and slightly accent each. Though your temperament is more at home in the music of Chopin and Schumann, I recommend especially music of the sort, and also the music of Bach. These give solidity and strength to your conception of musical ideas. We went through the Raff Suite, Op. 94. The Preludio is very good, he said. I like it. The Menuetto is, musically, the least strong of any of the numbers, but it has a certain elegance, and is the most popular of them all. The Romanza is a great favorite of mine. It is very graceful, flowing, and melodious. The concluding fugue is a fine number. You see how the theme is carried from one hand to the other, all twisted about, in a way old Bach and Handel never thought of doing. I consider this Raff fugue one of the best examples of modern fugue writing. Mr. Sherwood was fond of giving students the Joseph Wieniawski valse for brilliancy. There are many fine effects which can be made in this piece. One can take liberties with it. The more imagination you have, the better it will go. I might call it a stylish piece. Take the prelude as capriciously as you like. Put all the effect you can into it. The valse proper begins in a very pompous style, with right hand very staccato. All is exceedingly coquettish. On the 5th page you see it is marked amoroso, but after 8 measures the young man gives the whole thing away to his father. The beginning of the 6th page is very piano and light. It is nothing more than a breath of smoke, an airy nothing. But at the poco più lento, there is an undercurrent of reality. The 2 parts are going at the same time, the hard, earthly part, with accents, and the spiritual, thin as air. To realize these qualities in playing is the very idealization of technique. The Chopin Liszt Maiden's Wish was next considered. The theme here is often overlaid and encrusted with the delicate lace-like arabesques that seek to hide it, but it must be found and brought out. There is so much in being able to find what is hidden behind the notes. You must get an insight into the inner idea, must feel it. This is not technique, not method even, it is the spiritualization of playing. There are pieces that will sound well if the notes only are played, like the Little F minor Moment musicale of Schubert. Yet even in this there is much behind the notes, which, if brought out, will make quite another thing of the piece. Schumann's Andante, for two pianos, should have a very tender, caressing touch for the theme. The place where the 4/16ths occur, which make rather a square effect, can be softened down. On the second page, be sure and do not accent the grace notes. Let the accent come on the fifth finger every time. For the variation containing chords, use the grasping touch, which might be described as a certain indrawing of force in the end of the finger, as though taking a long breath. The variation in triplets seems at first sight almost a caricature, a burlesque on the theme, but I don't think that Schumann had any such idea. On the contrary, he meant it as a very sweet, gentle, loving thought. The last page has something ethereal, ideal about it. It should be breathed out, growing fainter and fainter to the end. The G minor Ballade of Chopin begins slowly with much dignity. The opening melody is one of sadness, almost gloom. The tempo on second page contains 4 parts going on at the same time. At the più forte, care must be taken to have the outer side of the hand well raised and moved from the wrist. The idea here is one of great agitation and unrest. The 5th page needs great power and the legato octaves well connected and sustained. The feeling of unrest is here augmented until it becomes almost painful, and not until the animato does a restful feeling come. This should be played lightly and delicately, the left hand giving the rhythm. The presto demands great power and dash. Let the wrist be low when beginning the chords, raise it after the first and let it fall after the second. Always accent the second chord. Begin the final double run slowly and increase in speed and tone. So, too, with the octaves, begin slowly and increase in power and fire. Numerous other compositions were analyzed, but the ones already quoted stand out in memory and give some idea of Mr. Sherwood's manner of teaching. Dr. William Mason. Years after the foregoing experiences, I had the privilege of doing some work with the Dean of all American piano masters, Dr. William Mason. I had spent several years in European study with Scharwenka, Klindworth, and von Bülow, and had returned to my own land to join its teaching and playing force. My time soon became so largely occupied with teaching that I feared my playing would be entirely pushed to the wall unless I were under the guidance of some master. With this thought in mind, I presented myself to Dr. Mason. "You have studied with Sherwood," he began. "He has excellent ideas of touch and technique. Some of these ideas came from me, though I don't wish to claim too much in the matter. Sherwood has the true piano touch. Very few pianists have it. Klindworth did not have it, nor von Bülow, nor even Liszt entirely, for he, as well as the others, sought for a more orchestral manner of playing. Sherwood has this touch. Tausig had it, and de Pachmann and Rubinstein most of all. It is not taught in Germany as it should be. The best American teachers are far ahead in this respect. In a few years the Europeans will come to us to learn these things." This was Sherwood's idea also. The first composition played to Dr. Mason was the G minor Rhapsody of Brahms, with which, as it happened, he was unfamiliar. I played the entire piece through without interruption, and he seemed pleased. "You have a beautiful tone, a really beautiful tone, and you play very artistically. Much of this must be natural to you. You could not have acquired it. You also have an excellently trained hand. I may say that in my 40 years of teaching I have never had anyone come to me with a better position or more natural and normal condition. Now, what do you think I can do for you?" I explained that I needed some new ideas in my teaching and wished to keep up my own practice. "I will explain my theories to you, and we will then study some compositions together. There is everything in knowing how to practice, but it is something that cannot be taught. I played in public 10 years before I found out the secret. Practice slowly and in sections. Not only must all the notes be there, they must be dwelt on. There must be a firm and rock-like basis for piano playing. Such a foundation can only be laid by patient and persevering slow practice. If the player has not the control over his fingers to play a piece slowly, he certainly cannot play it fast. Slow practice, one difficulty at a time, one hand at a time, Napoleon's tactics, one division at a time, applies to music study. Above all, do not hurry in fugue playing, a universal fault. Bach needs a slower trill than modern music. Chords are not to be played with percussion but with pressure. The main things in piano playing are tone and sentiment. When you take up a new piece, practice a few measures slowly, till you know them, then play faster. Take the next few measures in the same way, but at first do not practice the whole piece through at once. Just as in life, every experience of great joy or great grief leaves one better or more callous, so every time you practice you have either advanced or gone back. Right playing, like good manners in a well-trained child, becomes habitual from always doing right. As we are influenced for good or evil by those we associate with, so are we influenced by the character and quality of the tones we make and hear. Be in earnest. Put your heart, your whole soul, your whole self into your playing. Among other pieces we studied together was the Schumann Sonata in F minor, the Eusebius Sonata, a glorious work. In the opening movement, the left hand should be very serious and ponderous, with the hand and fingers held close to the keys, using arm weight. The melody in octaves in right hand is beseeching, pleading, imploring. In many places the touch is very elastic. The second movement begins very softly, as though one heard something faintly in the distance, and did not quite know what it was, but thought it might be music. The accents in this movement are to be understood in a comparative degree, and are not as strong as the marks seem to indicate. The scherzo is extremely pompous and is to be played with heavy accents and a great deal of vim and go, the chords with the utmost freedom and dash. One must use the letting go principle, which Paderewski has to perfection. We next took up the Grieg concerto. The Peters edition of this work has been corrected by the composer. At the first lesson, Dr. Mason accompanied on a second piano and seemed pleased with the work I had done, making no corrections except to suggest a somewhat quicker tempo. Not that I would do anything to impair your carefulness and accuracy, but you must take a risk, and from the beginning too. I am reminded of the young man who has been very carefully brought up. When the time comes for him to strike out and take his chance in life, he holds back and is afraid, while another with more courage steps in and takes away his opportunity. We discussed the slow movement at great length. Note in this movement the slow, dreamy effect that can be made at the ending of the second solo, and the artistic use of the pedal in the following chords. The third movement must have great swing and go. The octave passage cadenza should be practiced in rhythmical groups, and the final andante must be fast. The third time we played the concerto, I had it well in hand. Dr. Mason accompanied as only he could do, and at the close praised me on the way I had worked it up, and the poetry and fire I was able to put into it. Who could help playing with fire and enthusiasm when led by such a master? Dr. Mason was a most inspiring teacher, quick to note and praise what was good, and equally vigilant in correcting what was blameworthy. His criticisms were of the utmost value, for he had such wide experience and such a large acquaintance with music and musicians. Best of all, he was a true artist, always ready to demonstrate his art for the benefit of the pupil, always encouraging, always inspiring.